Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just wait for the last few people to be seated. Honourable David O'Byrne, thank you, as always. Just sliding the bat into the crease. Speaking of which, what a wonderful night last night in the Ashes. So I'm sure there's a few bleary eyes here. If you stayed up and watched the Australian Test captain bat with Steve Smith, put your hand up. Yep. Coffees on those tables, please, ladies. Thank you. Welcome to the Co-op Toyota 2019 Tigers Football Club Business Breakfast. It is the 12th occasion of this annual event and something that our football club is very, very proud of. It's an honour today to once again be able to lead the event. My name is Ben Harrison. I'm one of the Vice Presidents of the Kingborough Tigers Sporting Club, and I thank you all very much for your attendance this morning. We have an outstanding opportunity this morning in front of us, and I think in football you could use the phrase in Tasmania, united we stand, and this morning we certainly will be because we have a fantastic opportunity to have a conversation in the room with Brett Godfrey, of course the head and leader of the AFL Task Force. So a really interesting topic, but not only in the football sense, this is a business breakfast, and what a business journey as well too, obviously heading up Virgin Australia, working so strategically and close with Richard Branson. I'm sure we've got some interesting bits and pieces to come out of our conversation this morning. But breakfast is not far away from being served. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the Kingborough Tigers Sporting Club President, Paul Godomsky, to undertake the official welcome. Paul.
As usual, totally underprepared, and also forgot my glasses. I'm struggling to come to grips with the fact that I have to wear them these days, being so young and all. It's a bit of a challenge, but it's interesting to leverage off a comment that Ben just made, that this is the 12th business breakfast, and it couldn't be possible without the massive support that we get from Co-op Toyota, and especially Richard Stokes, General Manager of Co-op Toyota down there in Kingston. Your support, specifically of this event, and our football club is greatly appreciated. We couldn't do what we do, i.e. put 3 men's teams and 2 female football teams on the park without support of many sponsors, and I'd really like to acknowledge the massive support that we get from Cripps, Tasmania's master baker, a company that touches everyone's lives every day with your daily bread. And for those that don't know me, I'm actually the CEO of Cripps, so yes. But an opportune time to make an important announcement too, in that whilst we do have a very loyal and supportive major sponsor in Cripps, this week we extended our partnership with Glendon insurance brokers, and they've come on board in a very, very large way to support our women's program principally for the next 3 years. And that's a huge step from a local business in the Kingborough region to jump behind that program. We at the Tigers do have the largest female football program in the state. We have 117 registered girls and women that boot up every week, and we have teams, right from under 8s up into the SFLW competition and the TSLW competition. And I really thank Fred and Robert for your support from Glendon. Thank you very much. Our other supporters that need acknowledgement are QBE, thank you, Harcourts Kingborough, 911, one of my favourite shops, Kingston 4-wheel drive and Tyres, Kingston Panel and Paint, State Line Freight, D&W Electrical and City Glass. I'd really like to personally thank Brett for making the time to come today. It's really appreciated that you answered the call to start with, but I know that you needed to move a lot of appointments to get here, and we really, really appreciate it. To our distinguished guests, the Honourable David O'Byrne, Labor member for Franklin. David always supports not only our football club but football in general, and I think it's worth acknowledging that David is the only parliamentarian here today. So thank you, David, for giving up your time, especially so soon after the Labor State Junket on the weekend. I'm sure you might be quite tired. I'd like to welcome Madeline Ogilvie, President of the SFL, Jim Wilkins, Chair of the Football Tasmania Board. Thank you for coming. Trish Squires, CEO of AFL Tasmania, and the crew over there. AFL Tasmania also are a very big supporter of all of the functions that we do at the Tigers, and we appreciate that support immensely. I suppose today, when we listen to Brett, he will talk about unity and the importance of that in the next stage in the growth of football in Tasmania. But we also have a big sign of unity today, because I think it would be the first time that I welcome an opposing president from a rival football club in Julie Kay from Lauderdale. Thank you, Julie. I know you're on foreign soil today, but we also, on behalf of the Tigers, wish your teams all the very best of luck on the weekend, because we certainly want Southern representation in the grand final, so all the very best of luck. And also a warm welcome to Jim Horn, President of the STJFL. Thank you for coming. So today is about connection. This year at the Tigers, we decided to start a program which principally is a pun, Tigers, We Mean Business 2019. And in that program, we set up a couple of events, a luncheon, which happened to coincide with International Women's Day, and this business breakfast. And it's not principally about getting together and talking about football. It's all about connecting with businesses and people that don't normally associate with a football network to get together and talk about topical issues. In March, we spoke about leadership, specifically women in leadership, and that event was attended by 350 guests, and it was a massive day, but certainly an opportunity for many people that principally have never had any involvement with a football club to make a connection and start networking. We'll continue this program into next year, and hopefully it gets bigger and bigger. It's not all about the fact that it's a fundraising opportunity for the club. It's about building the community and recognising the part that football plays, principally in everyone's lives. And I think that's a good segue into why we're here today, because we all want to learn about where the AFL task force is at, and that's why Brett's here. So I won't take up too much more time, and just thank you everyone for your support.
Thank you, Paul. Now, on your tables, there's a couple of little documents there. One will signify that not only is this business breakfast one of the most important events of the year, also the Toyotathon is one of the most important events of the year. And if you're looking for a Hilux 4x4 workmate or a Hilux 4x4 SR, I can point you definitely in the direction of the flyer that is on your table, and I could potentially probably point you to table 4, because I think there are some fantastic opportunities to see some people driving away, possibly even this weekend. Stocks are available in the models that you see in front of you, and I would love to see some people driving around in the Hilux. In fact, I suggested to the president of the STJFL when I greeted him this morning that a fleet of those particular vehicles for the STJFL executive would be absolutely fantastic. And given the massive sponsorship that they also receive from Cripps, I think they're pretty fluid co-op, so a great opportunity for you to talk with them as well too. So everybody take advantage of having a look at those flyers, and love to see you driving around in Toyotas. Also on your table is the business breakfast raffle, displayed around to my right-hand side are some of the fantastic prizes. If you would like to dig deep and take some raffle tickets, of course, the old-fashioned $5 for one, $3 for $10 is there. A night's accommodation in a deluxe Davy studio at Zero Davy Hotel is the first prize, kindly donated by Tom Dark at Zero Davy, the general manager, one of our junior coaches. So thank you, Tom, for that. The second prize is the 2013 Gravity Ponds Shiraz with 2 Rydell wine glasses, an absolute beauty. The 2019 September Finals Barbecue Beverage Pack, well, that's what we call it down at Kingborough anyway. That's third prize. The carton of Pure Blonde and the Shield Estate Magnum of Shiraz 2015, kindly from 911 Bottleshops. Fourth prize, the 2020 Tigers Football Club family membership. So that will entitle you and your family to come to every single home game at the Tigers Football Club and full membership benefits. Fifth prize, the Great Barry Brothers by Jim Barry, the 2016 Vintage Magnum. The sixth prize, after you've consumed most of that, you'll need the Powerade and Lynx Gym Pack. So the gym bag, gym towel, and the Lynx to keep you smelling absolutely magnificent as you ease your way out of Anytime Fitness. And seventh prize is, of course, by the time we get to the end of it, it's the Upside Down Magnum. So there's a red and the white there. So please fill the envelopes for us, and we'd love to see you take something away at the end of the day. It is a breakfast, time to eat, kick the morning off. Breakfast is served. Enjoy your morning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed a wonderful breakfast, and our thanks to the fantastic staff at Rest Point Casino for their service to us today. So, ladies who have been attending to the tables, thank you all very much for looking after all our guests this morning. We move to the really exciting part of the morning and an opportunity to have a conversation with Brett Godfrey. Brett was born in Sanssouci, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, I'll get told if I haven't, in Sydney's far south, and was educated then in Melbourne and qualified as a chartered accountant with Touche Ross in 1987. Brett worked for the firm's Canadian arm before returning to Australia in 1989, hopefully in time to see the wonderful grand final between Hawthorn and Geelong, and joined the Sherrod National Jet in Melbourne as its financial controller. And Brett's Virgin career, which we'll touch on, began in the early 90s when he moved to the UK to join Virgin Atlantic Airline as their finance manager. In 1996, Brett became Chief Financial Officer and represented Virgin's interest in the acquisition of a new European low-cost airline, Virgin Express, in 1999. The year, of course, that the wonderful North Melbourne Football Club won the AFL Premiership. And at that time, Brett joined with Sir Richard Branson, announcing plans of Australia's newest airline, Virgin Blue. So we're going to hear a little bit about Virgin Blue and how that came about. In 2003, though, just here's a little interesting fact for you. Virgin Blue Airlines debuted on the ASX and turned a $10 million investment into a $2.3 billion listed company. And by the end of Brett's tenure, Virgin Blues had made $700 million in accumulated profits, and Brett retired as CEO of Virgin Blue in 2010. We're going to hear a little bit more of the journey beyond 2010 in our conversation, and a little bit more about what is happening in AFL in Tasmania. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome to the chairs Brett Godfrey, please.
I might need a cushion to see everyone, I think.
That's all right. I hope everyone can see and hear us clearly, more importantly, see you. Thanks so much for your trip down. Paul acknowledged that it's tremendous to have you here. It's going to be a real insight. It is a business breakfast, but there's so many people here that are involved, invested, and let's hope united in football as well too. I guess just to start with a little bit of brief history around your Virgin relationship and the engagement with Richard Branson. Is my mail correct that some of the great plans around Virgin Australia came about in a London pub with some ideas drawn on a beer mat?
Well, what else do you do when you've had 5 or 6
Absolutely.
pints in a pub but come up with a business plan for something?
Brilliant.
That's absolutely true. It was during the Ashes, I think, 1993. And Rob Sherrard, who was my first boss, who's actually a Launceston bloke and still lives there, we were sitting down. We'd both worked in aviation. And I remember in the 80s, Australia was frightful. There used to be the standing joke in the industry, the cheapest way between Melbourne and Sydney was via Auckland. And it was just because, you know, travel in this country was a luxury that most people couldn't afford. So yeah, it was a London pub, way too many beers, and those 12 beer coasters are still sitting at home in my, you know, and that's why I guess I'm sitting here today. And alcohol does have its advantages.
It does, and unfortunately, this is not a licensed event, so we're not going to come up with any business plans right now. I would think that we talk about the cheapest way across Melbourne, Sydney via Auckland, and an airfares war effectively started, I think, with Virgin entering the market. Is that fair to say? And did it change the whole dynamic of the way we travel now?
Well, I think it did, and it's sad because probably most of the people in this room can't remember what Australia was like in the late 80s. As I said, the cheapest airfare between, and I remember this really clearly, between Melbourne and Hobart was, in 1989, was just on $300, and that was before security charges, GST, noise levies, and fuel at $20 a barrel. in today dollars, that's about $870. So that's what we used to pay in today dollars to come across that little strait. And so what it allowed to do was, an innovative, disruptive model was allowed to allow people to travel more regularly. Kids to travel to home and back to school, grandparents to visit. And it became something that now we all really do take for granted. And it's funny, I still hear complaints it's too expensive. I went online this morning and you can get between Hobart and Melbourne for under $200 next week, 3 days of the time. So it's changed, but there you go. It did, and it just allowed economies to grow. It's been a great thing, I think. Aviation, it's from the 1960s has halved in cost to the market every decade.
So in terms then of working with Richard Branson, was he prepared to come into the Australian market and shake things up and make a change?
Yeah, can I give you a little bit of background? So in 1993, pub, beer coasters, the next 5 years were spent trying to get someone foolish enough to invest in it. And bankers, financiers, even my airline Virgin Atlantic all thought, and rightly so, it was ridiculous to come and try take on Ansett and Qantas. And I got probably sent for disciplinary reasons to Brussels to deal with, to work on an airline over there with 3 other people from Virgin. And I was the Stephen Bradbury of that group. I was the junior, and within the first year, 3 of those blokes had been fired for, let's just say, cultural reasons. And the unions actually went to Richard and said, well, this bloke isn't so... They were 3 Americans, and interesting, smartest blokes ever met, but really culturally insensitive. And so the unions go to the boss and go, well, we think that Godfrey guy can do a job. Now, that's the poison chalice when someone goes to the boss, the unions, and say, well, put that guy in charge. And so he had his doubts, but he gave me enough rope, and we managed to fix it. And by the end of that summer, I said I wanted to go home to raise my family. And he said, oh yeah, that's cool, but if there's ever anything you want to do, in Australia, let me know. And which I'll remember to the day, funny you should say that, because I had that business plan, tarted up, dusted off, and sent to his home in London that evening. We talked for 2 days over the weekend, and by the end of that weekend, we'd agreed to come and set up Virgin in Australia. And the last question he asked me before he signed off that night, he said, so how much money do you need? And I hadn't even thought that far ahead, so I just pulled a number out of a hat and said $10 million. And on the Tuesday morning, I got my weekly call from Pierre, my local bank manager, because I was always in overdraft, and he says, Monsieur Godfrey, we have a problem, no? And I go, Pierre, it's okay, I'll sort it. No, he says, we have a real problem. I've had to report you to the fiscal authorities. And I go, oh, Pierre, it's 200 francs, mate, no. And he'd put the $10 million in my bank account, and because he'd agreed that we were going to do it. And I'm thinking maybe I should be a Colombian drug lord right now, because I'm going, national pastime of Belgium was football and tax evasion. I thought I was on my way, with 10 million. But fortunately for him and Australia, and I think, him and Australia, that was $10 million that changed the face of aviation in this country.
So there's obviously been an enormous amount, goes without saying, an enormous amount of business lessons learnt. So for a business breakfast, some perfect pointers would be amazing. Can we even go back as far as the early days as a butcher's assistant?
Oh, where are you getting your information from?
My mail is delivered perfectly. So that's an early start. How do we get someone journeying from being a butcher's assistant to where we are now, implanting a AFL team into Tasmania?
To this day, I still struggle to eat mint steak after seeing what went on in the butcher's shop, I can tell you. So that's one piece of advice. Just careful where you get your mint steak from.
What's the pick of the cut, Brett?
It's the leftover bits and the mint steak, I can tell you, whatever they can find on the floor. No, that's a whole other... So you've gone way too far back. Look, from Virgin's playbook, I think a couple of things really resonate with, and it's really appropriate for this room, because I actually took our model from the Japanese car industry. Because I remember in the 80s, the Japanese car industry was derided and laughed at by the major Western auto manufacturers, and they thought it was going to fail. The quality, everything about it was wrong. And slowly they started, well, maybe they'll find a niche at the bottom of the market in this small compact section. And then, lo and behold, middle market. And then in 1989, Toyota launched Lexus, and it went on to be the worldwide best-selling mark in 2000, BMW, Audi, the whole lot. So for me, and there were the Western auto manufacturers basically teetering on the precipice of car manufacturing history, and it still continues to this day. So I had this real idea that, you know, when you look at Pan Am, Ansett, BlackBerry, which I've got a phone over there, I'm the last person in the world with a BlackBerry, those were all market-leading industrials that failed to innovate, failed to think outside the square, and to realise that they could be disrupted. So I've always been of the view, don't come to the market unless you can bring something different, and I think the Japanese car industry was a great example of that. And probably the only other one which we were famous for is we recruited for attitude and trained for experience. Pilots accepted. Yeah. You know, we did want some pilots who could fly aeroplanes. But the point being is that we actually thought it was better to get good people, not good experience, because you can train for that.
We might have got a different kind of airlines war if we had have had pilots with attitude.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, talking about air travel, is it true you've signed up to go into space with Virgin Galactic?
Well, I didn't. One of the things of working with Richard is you're often sitting at a press conference when you're about to say something and someone stands on your foot to not say something, and it's the bloke with the beard and the sweater next to you. And he came to Australia in 2003 to launch Virgin Galactic, and it will go. And I've actually seen the beta version from Mojave. It's the most amazing experience, I think. But what he did was he came down to announce it in Australia, and it was live on the news, actually, breaking news. And I was sitting next to him when he announced it and said, and my first Australian passenger is this bloke, and he's pointing to me, and I'm looking over my shoulder. My wife was watching it on the TV, who was totally against it, thinks it's the stupidest idea. It's her idea. It's Darwinism. As far as, if you want to be that dumb, go into space, and there's a reason we haven't done it to date. But I didn't sign up. I was volunteered, and then I asked if I could get a staff discount, of course, and he said no. So yeah, full rack rate, and it's not cheap. So
I can imagine. What's your plans for accommodation
in space
when you land?
I just want to get back. I actually did it for one. I love challenges and taking on new things. And for me, the real secret is not to go and be a space tourist. For me, the great opportunity is London to New York in 3 hours. And I genuinely believe this technology is the step before. We're never going to see a Concorde again because it's economically inefficient. But suborbital space travel, once you get up above the atmosphere, it's frictionless. Fuel is the biggest cost of an airline. And so if you can remove that, which you can largely, it changes the economics and dynamics. And I think in the lifetime of a lot of people in this room, that will be normal.
Now, with air travel comes tourism. So the two work really well together. I've got a little question for you into your step into tourism. How does it eventuate that probably Australia's greatest airline rivals set up a new tourism company venture together? So yourself and Jeff Dixon, so Qantas Group CEO, set up the Australian Walking Company. And how unique, it had such a massive focus in Tasmania.
Yeah, well, look, competition's a great thing. I mean, I've always been competitive, but it doesn't mean I dislike the person I'm competing with, and I think that's what sport is something I've always loved as well. And you love smacking the hell out of someone when you're playing it, serious. But at the end of the day, I love the idea of joining the opposition for a drink in the bar afterwards. And I think Jeff and I were fierce competitors, but there was not animosity. I mean, he always used to get the best lines, and I remember at one stage Richard challenged him to whichever airline got the best profit result one year, that if we won, Jeff Dixon would dress up in a Virgin hostess outfit and walk down serving drinks, and then Richard lost, he would do the same on Qantas, to which Jeff I was in the room, I saw it when he said, "Oh God spare me, I'm running an airline, not a circus," right? So he was a very serious character, but we just we both love the sort of things we did, and therefore, it doesn't matter which footy club you're with or what you do at that level, you respect people. You should respect people.
So then, onto the AFL task force. A little bit of background. Some people in the room will obviously have followed the progress quite closely. Just a little bit of insight as to how did it come about, and how did you become engaged?
Yeah, I flew down here for the first time in 2002 when we did Melbourne to Hobart, and Richard came down and look, I just thought it was a beautiful, beautiful place. But even then, I thought it was a pretty remote place. But it was one of the prettiest places I'd ever seen. And I just, in 2010, after I left Virgin, I wanted to spend some more time down here. As I said, Rob Sherrard, who was the Deputy CEO of Virgin, lives in Launceston, and I was visiting, and we ended up buying a place together, Quamby Estate in Launceston, and we've done a few more in that part of the world. And so for me, Hobart, was next, and I've got some interest down here. And we invested in a walking business. We went for a walk one day with a company and loved it so much and found out it was for sale and bought it and wanted to propel it onto the national stage, mainland and internationally. So that's how I got involved in Tasmania. And look, I got asked the other day, what's in it for you? And most of the people in this room will do things that sometimes there's nothing in it for them, and there isn't anything in it for me except for I genuinely believe that this is a beautiful story, and I do believe that in some ways this should have happened a long time ago, and I also do believe that it's up to us, if we want change to happen, to start that change now. And so it's an easy thing for me to jump on, because there's a lot of, the task force is full of the most amazing and passionate Tasmanians, and I'm the outsider. But I think it lets me have a different perspective as well. It takes away that issue of, well, it's just Tassie and it deserves it. We're not looking at that. It can't just deserve it. It has to economically stand up. And I can't, as a former, thank you for telling everyone, former chartered accountant, I couldn't put my name to something if I don't believe it. So I just think it's deserved. I think the business case is unproven yet, but we're hopefully going to get there. And it just is a good thing to do. I think, and for the state, I think it's, as someone said recently, it leads the nation now in a lot of economic metrics, including tourism. Football is tourism as well, and we shouldn't underestimate that the investment the government's made and the football clubs have made have driven tremendous investment in the north and the south. So for me, it just ticks all the boxes, and it's a worthy cause.
So United We Stand has been launched, and to our left-hand side, obviously online, there is a status of where we do stand. I had a little look this morning, and 12,191 in the most instances. So I think Tasmanians have pledged their support to an AFL side in Tasmania. It's grown a little bit this morning. So it'd be great to sort of see where your vision is. Obviously, we know there's a target of 50,000, but where that is to head. But I'd just like to, I know our President, Paul Godomsky, is excellent at issuing challenges. So I'm going to take a little bit of a leaf out of his book this morning, and we're going to break the mould a little bit for these type of events where housekeeping normally says that you put your mobile phones away. It's actually time, everyone, to get them out. Now, the President of Lauderdale, Julie Kay, sent me a text message on the weekend and basically said, Ben, have you pledged yet? And I hadn't. I'd been busy organising a breakfast. But I did it straight away. But what I did was I pledged my family, who are all great football supporters. So I did it by 4. So I think what would be great, and Brett, I believe the numbers update around 9 o'clock mostly each morning for the count online. So if everyone could get their mobile phones out, if you haven't already pledged to United We Stand.
Or your family.
Or your family, and it's very, very easy to do. Let's take a moment to do that and get in that process now while we talk a little bit more about it. So you can see it there in front of you, and I'd like you all to get to work and then check in at 9 a.m. and see the impact we've made. The next steps from here, other than this room filling up some numbers for us and getting us towards that target.
Oh, look, we'd love to get 50,000. Whether we get there or not that doesn't underpin what we're doing. There's about 23 work streams involved, and what we have to do is demonstrate to the government and yourselves and ultimately the AFL make the decision, and rightly so, that if Tasmania was to be granted a team, it would be sustainable and it wouldn't be a weight on the AFL, because let's all acknowledge here that that is a business, a successful business in itself, and the last thing you should ever do is put that at risk. Where I'm coming from and have come from is saying, well, that's a fair statement, but what I've really started to think about is, there is a risk. We've got to add value to the AFL, but at the same time, every person in this room who understands business will know that you have to protect your market share before you really focus too much on growth. Growth is great, but growth is always riskier than market share. And Tasmania is a market share. It is a founding footy state, and it does have a market already here that could hit the ground running if it was launched. My fear is based on, and I won't say promises because that would be an overstatement, but statements that have been made over the past 30 years, about the intent have risen or raised hope amongst, you know, the community here that they will get a football team, their own football team. And my big fear is that there is a risk of market share loss being this state, inroads being made by basketball and soccer are kicking goals, and kids are just switching off competitive sports as well. So my big fear is for you know, football in this state is that it does lose its status, and we see declining participation rates. Well, that's been stopped, or hopefully stopped, largely thanks to, you know, a big push by the AFL in particular, and AFL Taz, who are here. I think they've done, along with the Football Board, an extraordinary job of starting to turn things around. But it needs more than turning around. It needs a good kick on. Tasmania needs to get more elite players in the AFL. They need to have, you know, better pathways, which are being worked on. But at the end of the day, there is a risk that if the state misses out and it's put off for another 10 years, and we have this discussion in 2029 or something, I don't think football will be in the same place it is today.
It's obviously going to have a lot of challenges locally as well too, if there was to come about. Is there a vision for the relationships going forward and the stakeholders talking to obviously TSL level, community football level, development level? You must have some amazing people involved. Who are some of the key people that are working to from the task force to be part of the engagement in the community?
Well, you know, Julie's here from, you know, Lardo, and she's been a rock and has probably knocked on and bothered everyone in this room, or from a football perspective at least, to try and get them on board. So the task force have people like Julie who are deeply embedded in football in the state. They've got people like Grant O'Brien, who's the former CEO of Woolworths, based in Sydney. You know, James Henderson. We've got the founding CFO of the GWS, Paul Erickson. You know, Nick Rewald, of course, and folks from the government involved. So, have I missed anybody? No, I don't think so. And so, look, but we can't do it ourselves. This has got to become. I've always said this in a business context with Virgin, when we used to fly into a regional area, even down here, and say, if you want competition, you have to support it, right? Don't think just because we've come here and we've made the fares half price that you should stay with Qantas. If you want it to stay, so my view is if you want a football team, you've got to support a football team. And probably that's a good example, the 12,000 up there. I do know Tasmanians pretty well these days, and I know, and we were just talking about it at the table, until the countdown starts, when we say in, you know, a month's time we're switching it off. Even a guy who works for me, you know, realised when I asked him the question, he was embarrassed, said, well, I'll get around to it. And you can't get around it, we've got to get it done. Because it does send a very positive signal, and as I said, we do need as many strings to our bow as we can when we finish this business case.
I'm sure there is definitely a lot of interest in these topics that I haven't covered, so I'd like to extend it out, given we've got the radio mics. A couple of questions from the room while we've got a little bit of time to work with. Would anyone have a question for Brett? John.
G'day, Brett. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks.
As you've alluded to, we've had this conversation a number of times over several decades. You know, I recall in the early 90s there was a bit of a push for an AFL side, and then, of course, about 10 or 11 years ago. What is it about this moment? Yeah. What's the X factor that's going to get this one across the line when we've tried in the past unsuccessfully?
Yeah, great.
And I wonder, Brett, whether the stadium, the concept of a stadium, isn't part of the answer to that question. Yeah.
Look, that's a fabulous question, and I think what our number one goal was to go back to ground zero. We went back to 2008 when the last time that a bid was put forward, and it failed for a whole bunch of reasons, and you had to look at the messaging as to why it failed, and I think the messages were wrong, but they might have been apt at the time. The state was too small, it was hopelessly divided. There were a lot of, I think, myths that were put out at the time, frankly, and so we had to go back, and our number one job then is to go clean sheet. And to be honest, I go back to 2008, and it wasn't a group of business and community. It was a management consultants who prepared a document, and I think it was a fabulous document. We've used it as a base, but we've looked at it saying, look, can't be hard on the sleeve stuff. I mean, just because you might deserve a football team because of the history and the connectivity to the game, doesn't mean you should have one. It's got to, as a business person, I've said, it's got to stack up. So what we're trying to do is to zero-based budget this and go, how would it look? How could we compete? And we're not going for struggle, bottom quartile. We're saying we've got to be at least in the middle. So how much revenue do we need to be in the middle? We know how much it costs to run a football club. It's pretty easy. The AFL give you all that data. We know how much we should be able to generate from corporates. We've already touched that. So I'm getting into the weeds, but what's different this time is Tasmania 2019 is not Tasmania 2008. When I go back to my early iteration of Tasmania in the early part of this century, it's not the same. Today it's a vibrant, confident, as I said, in some ways market-leading economy that didn't exist in 2000. I mean, people were leaving the state, jobs were scarce, and I'm saying manufacturing is still an issue, but tourism is leading the way in this country, and people are coming back. So people like Grant O'Brien, who went off to be the CEO of Woolworths, there's going to come a time where those Grant O'Briens are going to be able to stay here. And so I just believe that the state is now in a position that it is economically more vibrant and successful. And I do believe that this divide, I don't believe it, I believe it's parochialism, and I think that's good and healthy. It's good and healthy, but it's today, I think the state can afford it, and it can do it if the business model stacks up. John, and that's the question, and we've got to make sure. So we're starting to see the wood for the trees, but it's just a different place. But it's also the time is right now too, because as I come back to, I believe that in this state, I'm a rugby guy, and I know in New Zealand you grow up wanting to be an All Black. That's your dream. In Geelong, it's a cliche, but you grow up wanting to be a member of the Cat Pack. In Tasmania, I still think there's a sporting identity issue that your heroes, your mentors, those people that you want to touch and feel reside on the other side of the ocean of Bass Strait. So the time is right now, and it simply it should come down to economics, not hard on the sleeve stuff, and hopefully that's what we can deliver. Oh, sorry, the stadium. Look, the stadium is a bit of a furphy potentially. It was a big idea that was floated only because we thought, look, one of the problems of being in Tasmania is it's really, we're so far away from national leagues. There's no national leagues to speak of really that we participate in. And so how do we get Tasmania to have the same opportunities for its kids to participate in national competitions? And Townsville, the rugby league, has a centre of excellence and just a $250 million stadium that is being finished in Townsville, right? It's got 178,000 population. It plays in the NRL, and it won a grand final in the last 5 years, and it's a very successful club. And Jonathan Thurston's someone I know, and he is a legend, and they've created a culture in a small place, smaller than here, that can be successful. The stadium is key because they see it as Adelaide Oval, they see it as the MCG, and they see it as you bring the stadium into the heart of a city, and suddenly it becomes part of the city, and just by default, you look at the crowds at Adelaide Oval, they're incredible. So it becomes an economic driver as well. It's not just an impost, but we're talking $250 to $350 million, which this state can't afford. But that's why our proposition is, federally, someone should be looking at how do we level the playing field so boys and girls in this state get the same opportunities as boys and girls in the mainland. And I think that's centre of excellence, that's a football stadium with the best facilities, but shared, round ball, footy, maybe cricket, and shared perhaps administration is what we're looking at. Could you share one CEO? I mean, a lot of footy CEOs don't necessarily come from being footy players, do they? So they also, if you could go to the AFL with, if you go to the AFL and say, these are the things we've ticked off, and by the way, and it's not going to be not the next few months that we deliver this report, by the way, this is being considered, then, that sort of helps the case, I think. I think it helps the AFL, because the AFL want, you play big games here, you need big stadiums. And we don't have them at the moment. So we either have to upgrade or get new ones.
Perfect. Another question, Madeline.
Brett, thank you so much for taking this project on. I think it's a really big one, and I agree with you that the timing is right. I think we're at a point in time where you could actually pull it off. And I know we all want a team, but actually what we're trying to create, I guess, is a club, right? So from community football land, we're fully supportive of this push, and we've never been more united across the 3 regions of football, and we recently met with you to pass that message on. So you have our full support. But I'd like to just also put on the table that if we're running a club, will that include a men's team and a women's team? Because we've just seen exponential growth in the women's game. All of these clubs, and Kingborough is at the forefront of that, but in the Southern Football League, our business has doubled in the last 5 years. So I see that as a really fundamental thing. I come from netball land, I'm not a footballer, and I think a lot of the women who come in, we do things a bit differently. The game is different as well.
Yep.
But again, point in time, could we get that running in parallel?
So I'll answer that. First question, the prize might be an AFL licence, but I don't think that should be the objective. The objective for everyone in this room is the health and vibrancy of football. And so that's starts at the community level. So our objective has been, if we failed in everything, the one thing we don't want to fail in, and that's why there's smart people in the room dealing with this, but we want to see more boys and girls running around kicking footballs. I sat at lunch yesterday next to someone you'll all know, Susan Alberti, who was pretty adamant and asked those same questions. And the answer is absolutely. And the AFL here, Trish Squires is here. I think there's probably more likelihood that an AFLW team could potentially start before an AFL team. But I don't mind that, because I think that then sets the next stage in the progression of, if you've got a VFL team, if you've got an AFLW team, what are you missing? And you'd be the only club at the moment that didn't have an AFLW team and not a football team or an AFL team. So I think it's got to be equal. And the great thing that Susan said, and it was a great message, she fought for this for so long, put some of her own money into it before the AFL actually grabbed it. But her thinking was, and then they all realised that women make up half the population, and now the football supporters and the volunteers, and so goodness, what a great idea that was. So I think that's the objective, is that it's a sport. It's not a men's sport anymore, and it shouldn't be, because they make up, as I said, half our population. So that would be exciting. And there's probably at the moment there's a lot of talent in Tasmania, as we understand. Probably more people. Well, 7 went over to. Yeah, look, I think there's a great opportunity that could be the leader, the lead in. Hi. No, cheers.
If it's a fair assumption that the AFL are basing their expansion teams on market share to Gold Coast and Western Sydney, and you've got a captured audience for decades here in Tasmania of AFL supporters,
Yep.
how bad does it have to get for the AFL before the business case stacks up to come and reward, I guess, the supporters that have been here for decades, before they leave and go to other sports?
Look, Hawthorn have 10,000 members here. North have, I think, about 8. So, we know football is still, loved and wanted in the state. We've talked to everyone, and there'll be a lot of people in this room who've spoken to me directly, and the message always was, we understood when the game went west. And everyone understood and thought it was the greatest idea for it to go out of Melbourne, right? And it was. And the AFL is the most successful sporting organisation in this country by some distance. So everyone understood the west journey. Not so many people in this part of the world understood the north journey. But the beauty that we have in this state is that if we were granted a team, and I'm not saying a 19, well, that's what we're aiming for if it works out. This wouldn't be the risk that a GWS or a Suns would be, and our model will have to demonstrate that we're not going to be a net loser for the other 18 clubs, and it can't be, because this is a footy state that would hit the ground running, and it's easy to demonstrate. Port and Adelaide and the Dockers, and also West Coast, they all had their supporters, all were local and supported VFL clubs at the time, and they've created their market pretty quickly. So this state would hit the ground running. But to answer your question about how desperate, I think the time in 2007, this state led the nation, I think, in participation rates or thereabouts. It doesn't anymore. It is now, because that is the big risk. And this is not it's not a threat or a push, but you've seen the decline. And if NBL are going to put a national franchise in here, and I'm pretty certain they will do something. I've spoken to David Gallup, and you know, they will look here and they would love to do something here. And as I said, kids are just dropping out of sport altogether, but give them their heroes back. Give them someone they can look and feel and touch and go see every second Saturday, and I think that changes the narrative. So I think it has to be sooner rather than later for this state.
Brent, I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but in the past we've had, in the attempts that John was referring to, of having a crack at trying to form a team, do you think the AFL is really serious about it? Because the reason I say that is that you look at the AFL Grand Final and they'll spend $1 million to have Sting sing for 1 hour or 15 minutes or something, where $1 million would go a long way to help grassroots footy in places like Tasmania. Do you feel that the AFL are behind it because we've had some of the senior executives in the past say, never ever will there be a team in Tasmania?
Yeah.
But I actually agree with that. I think it's really important that we stack up from the business side of it, because I think that's important. We shouldn't just expect it. But I'm wondering, does the committee and the organisation that's been formed, do you feel that they are the support?
So you're right, the AFL should put $1 million into grassroots football in Tasmania, and they do. They put 1.4 million, I think, or thereabouts, and they have been instrumental in what Gil did last year with people like Jim and others, and Trish. I mean, I think the pathways have been rebuilt, and it's thanks to the AFL. So are they serious? I think the AFL understand business. They understand that broadcasters like innovation and change and mixing it up. So I think they would seriously consider a 19th licence as and when the opportunity presented. And I'll come on to that in a second. So I think they do believe that, but they need to be, as I need to be convinced, that as you need to be convinced, because this is going to need government support. And they've got to be convinced, because nobody wants to prop up another, particularly in a market that already is pretty well football saturated. So there's not a lot more in additional value to the AFL per se for broadcasters. So we've got to be able to show that we're not going to impact the bit. So are the AFL serious? They've been very open. They've given us shared information with us so that we can do our modelling. I believe the AFL once upon a time didn't. You know, and you don't have to take my word for it. You just have to listen to the previous CEO. But there were messages, and there's been a lot of statements made about getting your pathways right, getting the north-south, and that's one of the things we tried to do the other day when we had, for the first time in the history of the state, the 3 mastheads almost on the same front page came together to say we're united in our push for a team. So we've got to tick those boxes and show all the myths and issues that have been raised in the past get fixed. But they're also not going to just go and change and introduce a 19th team, because why change something that's working? Our argument will be that, you know, EPL, you know, reformed in 1992, the English Premier League. It's had 49 clubs and its 20-team roster every year. That's different. But all I'm saying is we can always learn things from the most watched league in the world, for instance. Rugby's had odd numbers of teams. American football's had an odd number of teams. So we can learn things, and I therefore, but at the end of the day, I think, are a great insurance case for the AFL. You know, there's teams, you know, people in this room will tell you there's probably too many teams in Melbourne. So having this team, if it could hit the ground running as we believe it should be able to do, gives the AFL options in the future as well. So I think if something happens, it'll happen around one of the broadcasting deals. 2023 is probably too soon. 2025, if they extend this current one by 2 years that we've been hearing talked about, would be an option. But they're on board. And I'm going to say Hawthorn, believe it or not, they're on board. You know, Jeff Kennett, but they have options. And that's the thing, they're businesses. And so we shouldn't attack them when they say, well, look, if you want to go down this path, we'll move out of the state. Well, it's probably not room for 3 football teams in this state anyway. So let's be rational and not pick on people that have actually done a lot to keep football alive in this state.
Thank you. Some great questions from the floor. Brett, your time is seriously appreciated. I think it's given us all a great insight to where we're headed, certainly where you've come from, so an amazing business insights as well too, to help you on further business planning, because I know you work really well when there's just a little bit of booze involved in those business plans, because history has proven that, hasn't it? So on behalf of the Tigers Football Club, a very, very kind thank you for your time, and just a little bit of Tasmania for you to enjoy while you're here, or to take back with you, so as you're always thinking about us. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Brett Godfrey for his time this morning?
Thank you.
Thank you, that was amazing insight. We're just, our Tigers team just getting ready for raffle to be drawn, and we would just like to move forward to also a very important point in time. I'd like to ask Paul Godomsky to come forward again. There is a little presentation that is on the cards from our wonderful supporters, Co-op Toyota, and our event partner, and I would like to ask Richard to come forward if he would, please. And as part of the Toyota Good for Footy process, in Co-op Toyota's support of this event, Richard would like to present to Paul a wonderful contribution to our football club from Co-op Toyota.
Just be very quick. Obviously, we're enormously focused on selling and servicing vehicles at Co-op Toyota, but equally important for us is our role in the community, and gives us great pleasure to be part of this event for now almost a dozen years. And yeah, I suppose as part of our ongoing commitment, just presenting you this novelty check as such today, and look forward to many more years of ongoing support. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Very unexpected and quite often not very lost for words, but I am on this occasion. But very heartfelt thanks from the Tigers Football Club to Co-op Toyota, and I think 12 years of support builds a very, very strong relationship, and we thank you very, very much.
Thanks very much. Just a brief break now, and we will gather our raffle drawer and announce the prizes. Thank you.